Good evening, everyone. My name is Hillary Wank. I'm Manager of Operations for JCC Chicago Community Engagement. I'm joined this evening by my colleague, Eileen Ullman, who's the director of our department. We're delighted to have you with us. Just a few reminders, please stay on mute throughout the entirety of the presentation. If you are so inclined, please turn your camera on. It makes it for a more community feel. And at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce David Hirshberg.
So thank you very much, Hillary. This is the second time that I've worked with Hillary, and on my first book, My Mother's Son, a couple of years ago. I had a wonderful conversation, so thank you for inviting me back. I really appreciate it. What I'd like to do tonight is to give you a little bit of an overview of what I've written, and since I can't see you, I really would like to know if you could turn on your video for just a minute. I'd like to know who has read the book or who has started the book or who hasn't. It doesn't matter what the answer is. I just would like to know. So Robin, where do you stand? Robin, have you read the book? So Robin, there's no sound coming through. Can you hear me? She's going to try again. Alana, Brian, or Brooke, can you turn on your video for a second?
Some people just don't want to turn on their.
Okay. So can you turn on your voice just so I can ask you if you've read the book or not? If you could unmute.
I have some messages coming in, so they're coming in through the chat. And so Brian said he hasn't read it yet, and Brooke said she's just started.
Okay, and Alana?
She also has said she has not read the book.
Okay, good. So I'm not going to give anything away. I'll try to entice you to either read it or to be able to comment on it some other time with your friends. So what I'm going to do is the story is about free speech, movements, leaders, war, anti-Semitism, and Jewish pride. It takes place in the 1960s. The first book I wrote, which is My Mother's Son, took place in the 1950s, and it had a lot of the same things: discrimination, war, politics, immigration, and the American Jewish experience. That's what I write about, is the American Jewish experience. What I want to do is I'm going to share the screen, and I'm going to put on a few slides first, and then I'm going to, okay, so Hillary, can you see the screen? Yes, okay, good. So I wrote My Mother's Son 3 years ago, and Jacobo's Rainbow came out this year, and A Bronx Cheer is coming out in 2 years. I don't know if anybody knows, if they're not from New York, what a Bronx Cheer means. It's a double entendre. One meaning of a Bronx Cheer is a visual. You take your thumb and you put it either in your mouth or under your nose. You wave your fingers and you make a sound like that. And it's a polite way of, instead of giving the finger, and it's called a Bronx Cheer. The book is a double entendre. It has a lot to do with something else in the Bronx as well. But I'm not going to talk about that tonight. So you all know that when as books are being developed, they're heavily edited in 3 ways. They're edited by an editor who will say, look, this part of the manuscript doesn't work, or this paragraph is out of place, or, you slow down too much in this area and you want to keep the narrative going. And so I recommend that you cut something out and substitute something else. That's what a good editor does. And I've been very, very lucky to have extraordinary editors. There's a second kind of editing called copy editing, which says, okay, I've got the manuscript in final form. I want to make sure it adheres to the Chicago rules of style, and that it's the kind of English it's actually spoken, and it's the right kind of punctuation, etc. And then the third kind is proofreading, which is sometimes just a more minute form of copy editing. So we all know about that. That's pretty standard. But what you may not know is that covers go through an editing process as well. So the book takes place in New Mexico. And the first idea that the cover designer and I had was, well, to use the colors of New Mexico. And so the colors are this kind of burnt orange and yellow, and it doesn't work. And the reason there was a script of the title is because one of the main character writes a lot in a notebook, and that forms an important part of the book. And so in paper, it sounded great, but it just didn't work at all. So then we tried this other draft here on the right, and it started to look much better. If you can see where my mouse is moving around the screen, you see the flat top mountain here versus the low mountain there. And you see instead of the rainbow going into a cloud, the rainbow is more pronounced. And then we have these colors, but the colors also didn't seem to work very well. One thing you may notice over here is a little bit of a boathouse, and they took the boathouse out, and we said, no, the boathouse has got to go back in. So this was actually well thought through, and the designer, a woman in Colorado whom I've never met, she's done covers for me, I've never met her, and I thought that the actual font she used was just extraordinary on this kind of an Art Deco font. Now, how did we get? This is actually the Rio Grande, which makes an important part of the story. It's a very important part. It connects physically and emotionally people and places and things in the story. This is actually in the northern part of the Rio Grande, and you see the rainbow in the background, which is important for 2 or 3 reasons in the book. And then you can also see that this is another shot, and it's the combination of this shot and this shot which gave us the actual cover that's there in the middle. So the woman who did it's named Asha. She did a great job, and she worked very hard on it. I mentioned that there was a boathouse, which is also extremely important in the story, and I put it on the left. I just cut it out of the main cover. And this is a boathouse on the right, which is the University of Pennsylvania boathouse on the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. I wanted to use that. I went to the University of Pennsylvania for graduate school. They wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't allow it. So we took a generic boathouse. I would have loved to have paid homage to the University of Pennsylvania, and I was willing to give them publicity, but they just really weren't interested. The last one I'm going to show before I get a little bit into the story is this is a very famous painting from Thomas Eakins from the mid-19th century called Two Rowers. But I just wanted to show you that this main part of the story has to do with a trip that the narrator and his best friend take down the river. It's actually an escape. They take it down from the northern part of New Mexico down to another part in the south central. Actually, I'll show this one as well. They're up in Taos at a fictitious university called the University of Taos. It doesn't exist. Los Alamos is mentioned in the book. That's where the Manhattan Project was. There was an important scene that relates to Los Alamos. Albuquerque is the capital of the state, and it is also where the political figures live. And it's one of the most famous newspapers in the state is the Albuquerque Journal, which I wanted to use and show as a logo in the book, and they refused. So I created an Albuquerque Tribune instead. And down here is Alamogordo, down the Rio Grande River, which is here. Alamogordo is where they actually set off the first atomic bomb. The book is set to a great extent, not only at the University of Taos, but also in a fictitious town called Arroyo Grande, which is in the central western part of the state. The other part of the story that takes place, where the book takes place, is Vietnam. But for now, I don't want to get in too much more. I want to tell you a little bit about the book. And I want to read the prologue to the book because it's extremely important and it sets up the whole book. The prologue is short. It's only one small paragraph. It seems as if anniversaries have a way of letting spirits loose, and they don't respect boundaries any more than viruses do. So the only way to fool yourself into thinking you can control them is to make others believe that they can see them as well. A conjurer uses sleights of hand, feints, and misdirections, which can succeed because you're willing to suspend visual disbelief. However, an author only has one dimension to work with, as well as a disconnected audience, which can be a disadvantage. But on the other hand, there's no one to say that what you're reading is false. Today marks the 15th anniversary of a momentous event in my life, the day I was sent to jail. It's the obvious time for me now to tell my story. My guess is that you're going to believe this is fiction. That would be a delusion. So I'm setting up right away that, is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? And who's speaking? Who is the author of the prologue? Well, the author of the prologue is Jacobo Toledano, who is the main character in the book. It is not me. Well, obviously, I wrote it because I'm the author, but it's signed by Jacobo. And it's very, very important that it's signed by him and not David Hirshberg. And so I had a lot of inquiries from not only the people who were helping me edit the book, but also the early people who were blurbing the book. And they said, was this a mistake when they saw the PDF of the manuscript? Shouldn't that be David Hirshberg? And I said, no, it should be Jacobo. And then finally, one person, she said, oh, wait a minute, I get it. To Jacobo, the book is nonfiction because he's writing the book, but the book is fiction written by you. And I said, you got it. So it's this double track of the narrator in the book. He's writing about his life story and what happened in a momentous period of time in the 1960s. So to him, it's nonfiction, but of course it is fiction. And that's what the prologue is all about. And it's actually gotten quite a bit of press in reviews and on blogs, on Instagram and a few other places. Some people really, really like it because it's very unusual. I want to read the opening paragraph in chapter 1, and that really is Jacobo speaking, but it sets up the book. Until 1960, I should say that the book takes place primarily between 1964 and 1967, 68. Until 1960, all of us in Arroyo Grande were ignorant of electricity and automobiles, were unaware of plastic, steel, or homogenization, hadn't been exposed to vaccines, X-rays, or Freud, weren't acquainted with Shakespeare or Hemingway, had never listened to Gershwin or Mozart, couldn't have imagined Les Demoiselles d'Avignon or Starry Night, didn't know what JFK, DNA, SOS, IBM, CIA, or RBI stood for, were uninformed of the existence of George or Booker T. Washington, and assumed that England, France, Spain, and Portugal were still the most powerful nations on earth. We used sassafras roots as toothpaste, made paper from pulp and colored it with plant dyes, played the lute and the lyre, and used percussion instruments made from animal skins. And we never went to sleep without our parents saying, "Then all shall sit under their vines and under their fig trees, and none shall make them afraid." So I'm going to ask people to unmute, because the question I have is, have you ever heard the phrase, "Then all shall sit under their vines and under their fig trees, and none shall make them afraid"? Do any of you know what that is a reference to? Anybody?
I never heard it.
Okay. So it's from Isaiah. It's also from Micah. And who knows who if Isaiah or one stole from the other. But it is also from George Washington's letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, Rhode Island. The head of the congregation in 1789, early 1790, wrote a note to George Washington. The head of the congregation was called a warden in those days. It's now the president or executive director, in which he congratulated Washington on becoming the first president. And Washington wrote an extraordinary letter that historians say, he wrote it himself, had no help. And he talked about, made the children of the stock of Abraham, and he meant Jews, did not mean anybody else, but he meant Jews, live peacefully in the United States. And he ended that with the quote, "Then all shall sit under their vines and under their fig trees, and none shall make them afraid." And when asked about it, he explained very simply, as if he had in fact read a lot of the Hebrew Bible, that if their people are sitting under their vines and under their fig trees, and they're not afraid, well, then there's peace in the land. Because when opposing armies or countries would come in ancient times, they would burn all the vines and the fig trees and do a scorched earth policy, and there wouldn't be safe. So that's why that paragraph is ended that way. Most, but not all, most people who are Jewish say, okay, this is a Jewish story. My editor is not Jewish, is a librarian actually, and he lives in Minnesota. He had no idea. And when I explained this to him, and then a few other things, it was very cute. He started to try to pick up on the expressions in the book. He didn't do a very good job, but it was very funny, and I enjoyed listening to him. So what is the book really about? Well, although I wrote it, started writing it about 3 years ago, the main part was about free speech. And we all know how important the issue of free speech has come. I was not prescient to know that free speech would become the burning issue in the last couple of years, but it was a big and important issue. And so I started to think about, well, how could I write about free speech? And I thought back to when I was in college, and the free speech movement at the University of California, Berkeley was in full form. It started in the fall of 1964 and went through the spring of 1965. And that movement started out peacefully, and then it became a riot, and there were a lot of arrests, and it was really the first time that college campuses had erupted. It was right after the Freedom Summer, in which busloads of white northern men and women, mostly men, disproportionately Jewish, went down to many places, including Mississippi and South Carolina and Georgia, to try to register Black voters. And so it was not that unusual that the free speech movement started right after they came back that summer. But when I wanted to write about free speech, I didn't want to set it at the University of California, Berkeley. I thought I was going to, but then I realized that it's fiction. And if I put something in the book and I located it at Berkeley, somebody who was at Berkeley in 64, 65 would say, oh no, that didn't happen that way. And we'd get into all sorts of a back and forth, and didn't matter that it was fiction. So I said, I can't locate it at the University of California, Berkeley. Where am I going to locate it? And for reasons that I can't really get into, I thought New Mexico was the right place. It had all of the elements that I wanted to do. And I was also able to, in addition to Jews, to talk about Native Americans. And there's an important Native American character. And I couldn't put a Native American character into Berkeley. It just wouldn't have been appropriate. But the Navajo are a huge tribe in New Mexico, so it made a lot of sense, and it made it easy. And free speech is debated and discussed throughout the book from different vantage points, and it's probably the most important part of the book. The second part of the book has to do, not second sequentially, but the second idea is to write about movements in general, how they start. And sometimes they start very innocently, and people don't realize what's actually happening, and then they can almost have a life of their own, and they can go over the top. They can explode in certain ways, and so I wanted to show what would happen when a movement actually got out of control. The third thing I wanted to talk about was leadership, and the leadership in the same sense as movements. Sometimes leaders appear to be one thing, and outwardly they can have all sorts of very positive attributes. And it's only when the iron gets hot and there are some very, very serious issues where their true personalities come out. And here I have that's what I call these misdirections in the beginning. Even for those, I'll tell you, for those who haven't read the book, you think one thing about some of the leaders, and then as the book goes on, you start to question some of their motives and some of their behavior, and it takes you a while to realize what's really going on. And that happens in real life a lot, especially when you meet people or groups for the first time. Everyone's putting on their best behavior, and then things kind of get out of hand as soon as there's a difficult situation. They show their true colors. The fourth thing I wanted to talk about was war. And in My Mother's Son, which takes place in 1952 in Boston, the war was the Korean War. And it was a very, very important part of that book. And here it's Vietnam. And I actually got somebody who I do not know heard about the book and bought it very early on. I'm not sure what his motivation was, but he bought the book and he wrote me an email. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close to quoting. He said, I was in Vietnam the same time you were. I'm a physician, but I wasn't in Saigon. I was in the field hospitals, and I was the guy fixing up all the soldiers who were either shot or stepped on pressure mines and got blown up, or whatever the issue was. And he said, since you were a medic, and Jacobo's a medic in the book, he said, and in places where you describe, he said, because I describe a triangle between a few important parts of Vietnam, he said, that's exactly where I was stationed for 2 years. And he said, it's very possible that you and I ran into each other. I could have even been the physician in one of the firefights in which you were fixing people up. And he said, you wrote about my experience. It was absolutely unbelievably true. And I wrote back and I said, Dear Joel, I've never been to Vietnam. And he wrote back, he said, is this one of your misdirections? Is this truth or is this fiction? And I said, it's truth. And I've gotten to know him a little bit. And he said, well, how did you do that? How did you write what we all went through? He said, what kind of research did you do? And I said, I don't do research. I don't do the kinds of research that people do. I'll research a fact, but I'm not going to research an event or a diary or a movie or a book or an essay or a magazine article. Not going to do any of that. And I'll give you an example. In My Mother's Son, takes place, as I said, in Boston. The kids use the kids are younger there. They're 12 and 13. The kids use the subway system, which is called, today it's called the T. It was called the MBTA in the 1950s. And as I was writing about it, I realized that one of the stops that I had the kids get off, I did some research because something said to me, I'm not sure that stop existed, and it didn't. It wasn't built until 1955 or 1956. So I wanted to make sure, so the kids got off at an earlier stop, and I made that part of the story a little bit different. That's the kind of fact that I'll check, because I don't want people to say, no, you got your facts wrong. Even though the story is different, those things didn't happen. I do a lot of fact checking. In Vietnam, I wanted to make sure I understood how a pressure trap worked. And a pressure trap is something that was put in the jungles by the VC, and it's a trap that if you stand on it, even 1 foot touches it with just a modest amount of pressure, it blows up. And you don't see it because they hide it under the vegetation. So I wanted to make sure I would describe that correctly, and I would describe the kinds of guns that were used and the kinds of helicopters and that kind of thing. Those are facts. And I'll do research on that, but I don't do any other kind of research. After war, the next thing I want to talk about in all of my books is anti-Semitism. And I did have somebody who's Jewish, a friend of mine, say, "Why do you always write about anti-Semitism?" And I go, because that's my life, and that's everybody's life, almost everybody's life that I know. And I think it's whitewashed too many times in literature. And so I want to write about that. And in all three of my books, anti-Semitism is important. And the last thing is Jewish pride. That I like to write about success, how Jews can get through the difficult times, the difficult events, and then actually score some victories and can take a little bit of a victory lap. So those are the things: free speech, movements, leaders, war, anti-Semitism, and Jewish pride. So I want to go back a little bit to the screenshot, to the, I think that's the next one. Yeah. So whenever I write a book, I have in my mind an image of somebody who I think is best describes physically the person that is the character. So this is who I had in my mind for Jacobo Toledano. I described him as having red hair. By the way, I didn't find the picture first. I wrote the description of Jacobo with red hair, gray eyes, a red beard, and then I found the picture. So that's my Jacobo, but it's actually somebody, he's an actor. And does anybody know who this is? He's modestly famous. He's a guy named Seth Green. The irony is Jacobo is about between 6'4" and 6'6", and Seth is he's probably about 5'6" or 5'7". But it doesn't matter because I'm not showing his whole body here, but I got a kick out of that. Jacobo's sister Deborah in the book is described as exquisitely beautiful with black hair and dark eyes, and this is a Sephardic woman. And it's when I saw this, I said, "Oh my God, that's Deborah." It looks exactly like if I were an artist, I couldn't draw a better picture of who I wanted. And I have no idea in real life who she is. It's just a stock photo. An important character in the book is a guy named Ben Veniste, who is a cafe owner and a cook. And this is a Jewish. It's from Spain. A Jewish cafe owner and pastry shop. He's a cook, mostly pastries. So that was my image of Ben Veniste as well. And the love interest for Jacobo is a woman named Mir Tudela, and she's an Indian Jew from Cochin on the southwest part of India. Most, but not all, of the Cochin Jews have moved to Israel, but there's still a group there. And this is one of the Jewish women from Cochin in India. And I mentioned an important thing about using Indians. The name I gave to the major Indian in the story is Joseph Deschênes. Deschênes is a real popular Indian name among the Navajo. It is a French derivation, so there must have been some French blood or French interaction with the Navajo. And this is almost exactly as I described. And when I found this, you see it's stock photo. It says Alme on there. I don't know if you can see it, but that's what they do to block copyright, and so people won't publish it. And I have no interest in publishing it. This is exactly what I had described, and I was thrilled when I found this picture of Joe Deschênes. Now, the second lead character in the book, the second lead male character, is a guy named Herzl Schneider. And do you know in real life, anybody know who this is? It's extremely famous. And when anybody take a crack at this? Nobody? So you'll know automatically when you see the next slide. You know who he is now? Anybody know who these people are? There's nobody there who knows who these people are? Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman were the three civil rights workers killed in Philadelphia, Mississippi in the Freedom Summer of 1964. This picture is so famous, I'm shocked that nobody knows who they are. But in any event, Herzl, to me, was Andrew Goodman. The picture, I also wanted to honor him, not in the book, they're in the book, but in presentations. As three young men died registering voters. So this is actually from the Freedom Summer of 1964 in Mississippi. It's talked about in the book. This is a picture in a small town in Mississippi where you see a white here is holding a sign that says register to vote. And the police are pulling away a placard away from this fellow here, and these people, God knows if they'd been pushed away or shoved away. But it was pretty traumatic trying to register people to vote in the summer of 1964. So I'm going to stop asking questions because if you don't know Goodman, then you're probably not going to go to any of these. The leader of the free speech movement that I created in New Mexico, I gave him the name of Miles Bradford III. This is actually a picture from the Berkeley free speech movement in 1964, and it's a picture of the leader whose name was Mario Savio. Now, one of the things that shocked me when I found this picture was that I have a scene in the book in which Miles gets on top of a car. He's got a megaphone, which Mario didn't have in real life. And it's a very important scene in the book. And when I found this, I said, this is art imitating life, imitating art. So I thought it was really just amazing. But that's Mario Savio. Now, this is also a scene from Berkeley in the free speech movement. You can see they're holding the sign. And this is the gate through which, if you've ever been to Berkeley, you know, on the main campus, this is the main gate they walk through. A couple of things to notice that I thought was amazing. Look at what the men are wearing. They're all wearing, young men in college and graduate school. They're all wearing jackets and ties. And the woman here on the left is wearing, you know, what was a villager outfit. And the same with the young woman here. They're dressed beautifully. They're peaceful. This, I believe, is Mario Savio. And the reason I believe it is if you look at the hairline, it's curved in the front and really sculpted on the sides. And if you go back to one, you can kind of see that same hairstyle. So I'm pretty sure that that's Mario Savio on that as well. This is actually a scene from one of the police photographers took this of the beating of the students at UC Berkeley in 1964. And I have a scene in which there are not in the building, but outside of the building in a big courtyard where the police just go wild as well. This in the book is a woman I call Claudia Novak. She was, in the book, she was the leader of the co-leader of the free speech movement. And in real life, this is Bettina Apteker, who was the co-leader of the Berkeley free speech movement. On the left is Sproul Hall at Berkeley. On the right, and I'm not going to ask anybody if they know, that's the main entrance to the library at Columbia University. And they had big riots in 1968. The reason I put this up there is that one of the reviewers, I think, just didn't read the book because she talked about how this also was lifted from 1968 Columbia, and she did things in her review which had nothing to do with the book. But the one thing that is similar is this kind of a similar look between the main administration buildings. And on the left is Sproul Hall, and I call it Gettysburg Hall in the book. This is a scene from the 1950s of a typical Navajo village. And there are scenes in the Navajo village in the book. It's exactly what it looked like. Lots of pickup trucks. It was wired then. You could see all the telephone poles, but they didn't have very many comforts. And this is a little earlier. This is from the 1930s, but this is a trading post. And Jacobo's father actually runs a trading post in which Joe Deschênes, the lead Indian in the book, had also worked in the trading post as well. This is not from the 1950s, but it's similar in concept to what I was thinking about when I wrote the book to describe the trading post. These are scenes from Vietnam. And it was when I had the discussion with that fellow Joel, who was the surgeon, we talked about, I showed him some of these pictures. At one point in time, he actually thought one of these was me. And these are medics. And you know they're medics because here you see they're carrying Colt 45s. That, by the way, was a fact. I wanted to make sure in the book that I put the right kind of firearm that a medic carried, because if I put something else, then somebody would say, well, you're not true to what actually happened. But this is what they do. They're holding up an IV line to a fellow who's been shot. This down here in the lower right, it is a poignant scene in the book, the after effects of this. That the fellow who's in there is an army soldier. He's called a tunnel rat. And you can see he takes up almost the entire opening of the tunnel. This tunnel goes deep underground. There were thousands of them in Vietnam, and they were loaded with explosives and VCs just waiting for the GIs to come in there to shoot them. The job of going into a tunnel in Vietnam was the worst thing anybody. You cannot imagine what people have said about that. And so I have just a very short 1.5-page scene about that in the book. It's actually frightening even to write about it. That is, as the last time I'll ask, is there anybody who knows who this is? Nobody. So you're all in your 30s because you're not old enough to know that that's David Suskind. And if you don't know who David Suskind is, he was one of the most famous interviewers. He had a show on every week. Here, it's called WNTA, which is now, I want to go back, which is now WNET. It's Channel 13 in New York. It's the public broadcasting station in New York. They changed the call letters, but it's 13. And in the book, I have a doppelganger called David Sussman, who is David Suskind. And I tried to mirror the kind of conversations that David Suskind had with the guests. And I think that is my last one. And yes, it is. So I'm going to stop the sharing, and I'm going to open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions, please unmute and fire away.
There are a few questions. Let's see. Susan asks, what prompted you to incorporate freedom of speech into the book when you started 3 years ago? It might not have been such a hot topic as it is now in the news and with politics.
So it's a good question. And as I said, it wasn't that I knew it was going to be the hottest issue, but for me, it was a very big issue, and I could see it brewing all over the world. Especially as you look, if you look to Eastern Europe, and especially 3 years ago, Hungary and Poland, it started there, and then France enacted some rules on free speech. So did the UK, and so it was clear that it was coming here, and it was here, but I knew it was frankly going to get bigger and not smaller. And so that was when I said, I really have to write about this. This is really important. Good question.
Elaine, you're on mute. I have another question, another couple of questions. Do you think you'll ever write a story about or a book about your own life?
No, I have no interest in my own life. I have a boring life. I'm married to the same woman for 53 years. I have 3 normal sons. I have 4 normal grandsons. No one's ever been convicted of a crime. There's been no crisis. Everybody's a good boy. That's all we have is boys. I don't carry the double X gene. I only carry the XY gene, apparently. And And I've had a very normal life in terms of my business, what I've done. So it would be the whole thing would be one page, and it would be boring.
And then there's just one last question. Have any of your books been tapped for a movie?
No, and that's a fantastic question, and let me talk about that a little bit. There is a famous agent in New York who I don't use an agent, but she's a business friend of mine, not a social friend. And she gave up her literary agency about 5 years ago, and her sole thing that she does is she takes literary fiction and she packages it and to go into movies. So she met me at a book party, and we chatted, and she invited me to her house, which was actually a whole lot of fun in the city because she had two dogs that wanted to spend most of their time on my lap. But in any event, she said that she wanted a copy of A Bronx Cheer, and she got it. And she read all my books and liked them, but she said, this is a movie. So I said, great, how do you make a movie? And she said, well, do you know how to make a movie? And I said, well, I guess you put a synopsis together and you send it to somebody in Hollywood. And she said, that's 100% true up until about 10 years ago, and now it's 0% true. So I said, well, how do movies get made? She said, you actually have to make a PowerPoint presentation that follows a certain script, no pun intended, which is a difficult script to follow. She said, and then I take it and I select either a producer, a director, a screenwriter, or a star, and I have to get that person to say yes, and then that person takes responsibility to put the package together, and then they take it to Hollywood. She said the only thing Hollywood does now is they distribute. They don't do anything creative. And so she said to me, you've got to put this together. And I'm telling you, I've been working on this for 6 months. It is unbelievably difficult. So the answer is maybe I'll do that. And if I do that, the odds of getting it to actually to a production are very small. I don't even know if I can do it. And no one else can help. You have to be able to do it yourself. So I'd like to do it, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to do it. So I don't think so.
It'll be interesting to see. You know, we run the Chicago Jewish Film Festival, watch a lot of film. And honestly, in my notes on this page, it says film with a question mark, because the story has everything. It's got action, you know, it's got war, it's got the free speech movement, it's got, you know, you know, it's got like it's got love of family, love of between a man and a woman, it's between friends, between Jews. And I just, when I was reading the book, I could picture the film.
So it's interesting that you say that, because Susan, who is the agent to get to films, she said for both My Mother's Son and this book, and Jacobo, that making a film out of them would be difficult because it's too broad a brush. There's too many things going on. And she said the reason she likes A Bronx Cheer better than the other two books, and she liked them all, so it wasn't a question of she thought one was bad. She said it's one narrative, one storyline, it's tremendous pulse and tremendous building to a crescendo, and you don't take a detour any place, the way you take a detour in Vietnam, or I took a detour in Korea, or in My Mother's Son, and also went back to Kristallnacht in My Mother's Son. Not this book. It's just boom, straight through. And she said, that's the movie. So I actually asked her, I said, well, what if I took part of Jacobo and just and took out some things? And she said, you could try. She said, but I'm not so sure that it would have the power that the book has. So she said, keep the first two as books. This is the one, The Bronx Cheer, is the one she wants to see a movie. The only thing I'll tell you is I have a friend in Los Angeles who is a very talented author, and he has also written things about screenplays. He's actually got a book about how to write a screenplay, although it's an older book. And I'm seeing him in January, and I'm going to sit down and talk to him about, could he take a Bronx Cheer, and could he help write the pitch, or help me write the pitch? And I'd pay him to do this, the way you pay an editor to do this.
Right.
And then if it were good, I mean, he's a very talented writer. If they said, well, why don't you guys write the screenplay, then I'd be happy to write it with my friend. But until I sit down and talk to him over a long dinner, it's too intimidating for me. I'll be very honest with you. I'm not intimidated over too many things. This scares the hell out of me to try to write this.
Can I ask you about the rainbow?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, go on, please.
No, I mean, rainbows they definitely have meaning, as we talked about before we got on. In Judaism, like there's definitely there's a blessing for a rainbow. There's a meaning behind rainbows. Was it Jewishly inspired?
So the answer is yes and no. Originally, the idea for a rainbow came from the describing how the currents of the Rio Grande, they carry some light color mud, some dark color mud, and the way the sun, I looked at lots of pictures of the Rio Grande, and the way the sun brushes against them in New Mexico, some look green, yellow, blue, white. And I said, gee, that's kind of a rainbow going down the river. And I checked it with somebody I know in New Mexico, and they said, that's exactly right. Then I thought about describing Jacobo's father, who also has red hair, but his beard has multicolored, almost like stripes in it. And that's from me. It's hard to believe, but when I was young, my beard was very, very thick and long, and it was red and blonde and brown. And it looked like a painting. I'll tell you when I finish one little anecdote about that. And in terms of Jewish, the only rainbow that came to mind, was the idea that I've seen graphic displays of when the Red Sea parted, and in some of them they show a rainbow, not a rainbow like New Mexico, and this is just the artist's interpretation. So that's when I said the yes part of Jewish. I thought that it was representative of something that is positive and forward-looking, and they saw the rainbow from the one side of the Sea of Reeds to the other. So I thought that the rainbow here could be the same kind of thing. And then I don't want to say much about it, but near the end of the book, there's a major scene about the rainbow, which is quite Jewish. So
Right.
It's really a great question.
And so, David, I have to ask you, because I know that this is not this is what you write books, but you don't write books for a living.
No, if I wrote books for a living, I'd be in a debtor's prison or a pauper's jail. Anyone, unless you're somebody famous, you always lose money in the publishing business. It's just a fact of life. You can't make money. There's just no way to do it.
So what inspired you? When did you realize that there was an author inside of you?
Probably about 10 years ago. And for a few years, I thought about that, but didn't know how to start. And so for me, the only way I can start a book is when I know the first sentence. And although I wanted to write my mother's son, and I had an idea of some characters, until I came up with the opening line, I was I couldn't do anything. And the opening line of that book is short. It's when you're a kid, they don't always tell you the truth. And when I wrote that, I said, okay, now I can write the book. And I literally just sat down and wrote draft after draft. And until I wrote, it seems as if anniversaries have a way of letting spirits loose and they don't respect boundaries any more than viruses do, blah, blah, blah. That's when I knew. When I got that line, I knew I could write a book. So I started actually probably 6 or 7 years ago. It took me a fairly long time and many drafts to write My Mother's Son. It took 3 drafts for Jacobo, and The Bronx Cheer was like a draft and a half because I learned how to write. It's a process, and you do learn. And if you have a good editors, by the way, will not kowtow to you. Good editors will say, this isn't working, change it. I'm not going to mention the author, but there's a famous author who wrote a book that I really, really loved. But it's a long book. It's about 500 pages, wrote about 20 years ago. And he had a scene of about 40 or 50 pages that was well written, but irrelevant to the book, completely irrelevant to the book. And it was obvious that because he was famous, his editor or his publisher was intimidated to say, well, you have to cut this. It's nicely written, but has nothing to do. And apparently the author has admitted to people, and through 6 degrees of separation, I heard this from somebody who heard it from somebody who heard it from the author, that, yeah, he just liked the writing and he knew it had nothing to do with the book. Shame on the publisher and shame on the editor. When I established my relationship with the editor, his name is DJ, I said, DJ, I want you to blast away at me because I want the best book possible. So don't be afraid to tell me, this isn't working at all. So one quick thing on the rainbow with my beard. When my oldest son was at sleepaway camp, so I was probably 40 or so, a woman came up to my wife. I've known my wife since we were actually, teenagers. And so a woman came up and she looked at us and she said, oh, you have to be Ann, oh, I know you, Ann, and blah, blah, blah. And I know you. So we said yes, and we hadn't seen her since high school and this kind of thing. So she says to me at the end of the day, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. And she said, and my beard was bright red and with these blonde and brown. She said, it's a personal question. I said, listen, Sharon, if I don't want to answer, I won't answer. So she said, what do you use to color your beard? And I said, what? And I said, why? First of all, I don't color it, but why do you ask? And she pointed, and then she introduced us to her husband, who was only a couple years older than we were, but his hair was totally gray. And she was dying to get him to color his hair. And she said, you do such a good job. I figured, you'd have the brand name to be able to give to my husband. So I said, Sharon, I don't color my beard. So she said, well, she started to really push because she thought I was just holding out. So finally, I said to her, and I said to her, Sharon, if I didn't fix this, do you think I'd give a shit about the color of this? And she turned bright red and she said, got it. And it was hilarious, but I've always remembered that. So maybe the rainbow was as much my beard as anything else, but that's why I gave it, I think, to Jacobo's father. So one question that I'll ask myself that most people do ask me is, why did I pick a pseudonym? Uh-huh. And how did I pick the pseudonym? So David is my father-in-law's first name, and Hirshberg is my maternal grandfather. And those two men had more influence on my life than anybody else. And I thought it was a nice way to honor them. So my publicist, this is really, to me, it was hilarious. My publicist is a wonderful woman. She's a modern Orthodox. And she she knew me as David Hirshberg. So I told her it was a pseudonym, and I said, we have to be honest with people and say it's a pseudonym. We're not trying to hide who I am. So she said to me, well, what's your real name? So I said, my real name is Frederick, 2 syllable, not 3, not Frederick, Fredric. Last name is Price, Price. So she looks at me and she says, this is bizarre. She said, every Jew I know wants to change their name to the most Goyish name possible. You were born with the most Goyish name possible, and you wanted to give yourself a real Jewy name. And it was hilarious the way it came out of her. And I said, well, I write about the American Jewish experience. I should have a Jewish name. And but it was that's why I do it. The other thing is really very serious about it. If I used my name, my given name, and people did a search for it, they'd find somebody on LinkedIn or one of the others. They'd say, well, wait a minute, I got the wrong person. This guy develops drugs. He can't be a writer, or if he is, he's probably written some crap about the drug industry or something. So I wanted to create a separate thing so there's no cross-pollination. So in business, I'm Frederick Price, and in the literature world, I'm David Hirshberg. And I always will tell people what my real name is, but frankly, in the literary world, they don't care. It's just David. And when I meet people, even though they know that's not mine, they'll call me David. And at this book party where I was introduced to this woman, Susan, the literary agent, now movie agent, everybody there introduced me around as David Hirshberg. And I said to the first person, it's not my real name. They said, no, it is your real name in the literary world. Just go with it. So I do.
Do you have trouble with like, are you two different? Do you feel like you're two different people in some ways?
No, it's a very good question. The answer is no. Although I'll tell you one quick anecdote. Hillary, do we have another minute? I think it's 8:59. We have a minute. Just give me the high sign and I'll stop. I got an email about a week or two after the book came out, Jacobo came out, and the email was from a David Hirshberg. And so this guy writes to me, Dear David, my name is David Hirshberg, and my friends are all congratulating me on the fact that I've written a book. He said, I haven't written a book. He said, I'm in the real estate business, and but who knows? We have the same name, the same spelling of our name. Perhaps we're related. So I picked up the phone, and I called him, and I had a family tree, the Hirshberg family tree out, and we're third cousins. And so I have met 4 cousins, third and fourth cousins, because people get in touch with me and say, gee, I'm a Hirshberg, and without a C, a lot of Hirshbergs, Hirsch, and other ones said, I'm a Hirshberg, and I'm not an Hersh. There are not many Hirsh Bergs. And everyone who's been in touch with me, I take out this family tree that goes back to 1849 or 1850, and I go, all the different descendants, and I go, yep, there we are, and we're related. Every single one I've been related to so far, and it's been great. Because so, in that sense, yeah, I'm the writer David Hirshberg who's found family members, and I actually went and met the other David Hirshberg. My wife and I went up north to meet him. We had a lovely time, so it was really very nice. I will say though, I met a Hirshberg who lives in Florida, and we had great woman. We had great talks, and her husband was on the phone. Everything was great, and I sent her a political joke, which I thought was hilarious, and I never heard from her again. so that I guess she took offense.
David, we do have one question from Alana that I would like to get to before
Sure.
we wrap up. And she says, while you write of tumultuous times, does your home life suffer, or is your stability maintained?
Yeah, so I have a very stable, as I said before, a very boring life in terms of there's a lot of stability. The writing is fun. It is fiction, so I can just wrap myself into the fiction and write. I'm on the third floor of a house, and I've got this is an office. That way, I've got actually a big conference room, and I'm up here by myself, except for my advisors, my four-legged advisors here on the floor, and I'm away from everybody else. Can't hear anything that goes on down below, and so I can do my regular work and write, and it's very enjoyable. So there's nothing tumultuous at all.
Has
And
it,
well,
I was just going to say, for your children, so your children are obviously adults, and so they knew you in one way, as an entrepreneur, and and how has that been for them to see you in a totally different light as an author?
so I have two daughters-in-law. My third son is not married, and my oldest daughter-in-law is probably the most interested in my writing. She is a writer. She's not been published yet, children's books, but she's actually quite talented. So she is. I've had more interaction with her on the writing than I probably had with her on anything else, which has been very. She reads everything, and she ain't afraid to critique, and so that's been really good. She's married to my oldest son, who is involved in drama. He was an undergraduate in drama, so he's read a lot of literature, a lot of Shakespeare. He was an actor, and he's now actually the general manager and executive producer of a big performing arts center at a major college. So he reads everything, but he doesn't interact with me that much. My other two sons, about the same. They read everything, but they don't really make too many comments on it. They enjoy it. The only thing they've commented on a couple times, gee, couldn't you include an anecdote about us, gussy it up in some fashion so nobody will know it's us? And I go, no, not going to do that.
Yeah.
Not going to do that. I did have a dog called Black Dog. And so in My Mother's Son, I created a dog called Blue Dog. That's about as close as I've ever done to bringing anything that I know into a book. But no event, no human, nothing.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading Bronx Cheer.
I'll make sure you guys know in a couple of years when it comes out.
Bronx born.
Oh,
right
really?
here.
Where in the Bronx?
I lived the first 4 or 5 years of my life in Co-op City.
So in the book, it takes place mostly along 176th Street and the Grand Concourse, but there's an important part of the book that describes what the area of Co-op City used to look like, the marshlands, before it was Co-op City. And so anyone who's from the Bronx will read it because it's in the 1950s, and they'll go, oh yeah, I know exactly where that is. So you'll get a kick.
Anything about the
And
Bronx
then-
bombers in there?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, there is.
Then I will read it.
But it's not. It's more about Yankee Stadium and the area around Yankee Stadium, with the courthouse and a few other things. It has nothing actually to do with baseball. The first book has a lot to do with baseball.
Yes.
This book does not.
And the area where Co-op City was built before that was an amusement park.
So right, it was right. They built after before Co-op City was built. There was a big amusement park. Was that called Freedom Land?
I think so.
Yeah, it was called Freedom.
Yeah.
But before they ruined the marsh, it was, I think, 270 magnificent acres of marsh.
Yeah.
And it was just all sea life. and it was. I remember driving past it and through it when I was a kid. Yeah, it's really nice.
Well, David, thank you so much. So now we would like to have you back when the next book comes out.
Happy to do it. Hopefully I'll come out to Chicago. We won't have to wear masks.
That would be a blessing.
Yeah,
that we can wrap our heads around, and you can join us in our new Zoom room that we are in the process of building in our building. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. Everyone, thank you again.
Happy to have been here. The only thing I would ask before you get off is if you read the book and like it, please put a review on Amazon. I know people don't like Amazon. You don't have to buy it on Amazon, but it makes it actually, the more reviews, the better Amazon treats authors. And I can tell you that I've got 230 reviews on My Mother's Son, and Amazon helps promote that book, and it sells a lot. So I need more reviews. So Thank you in advance.
We can definitely do that. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Hillary. Thanks, Eileen.
Please visit our website, jccchicago.org. Our film festival, Fall Film Festival, starts on next Friday. So check that out and look for more interesting conversations coming soon. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you
Have
again.
a good evening. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.